Welcome to the ROOT6 Pinewood roadshow venue. We triggered off the roadshow in Manchester with the BBE exhibition there, and since then we went to Glasgow, Belfast, Dublin, Cardiff, Bristol, Pinewood today, and Chiswick next Tuesday. And then we finally end up the roadshow in BBE London. And one of the reasons why we embarked upon that tour is we really felt we've got to get this technology out to people. We've been presenting file-based technologies now for 5 years, and obviously 5 years ago it very much was an educational process, but obviously we've seen that transition now that people really are actively involved in file-based acquisition. And also we've seen the technology change, and what we felt, rather than coming around doing a PowerPoint, is we actually now can bring the technology. So we've pretty much got a post-production facility, a QC, a duplication facility, a studio facility in that rack, and we're going to take you through those processes. So first of all, just a quick introduction. So my name's John Harris, as Darren mentioned earlier on. I've got my partner here, David Skeggs, who's equally going to be doing presentations, one of our product specialists. We have a whole plethora of salespeople from ROOT6, so check your wallets before you leave. So we've got a very tight-packed agenda today, and the idea is really to make you aware of file-based workflows. And one of the things we're trying to cover is typically when we've approached file-based workflows today, is we've taken our traditional tape-based workflow and put files on top of it. Okay, but there's a lot more we can do with file-based workflows. And one of the key elements that we're going to bring across is the automated functions that we can do. And automation is very, very important in our budget-conscious programming for today. So as you can see there, we're fundamentally going through the capture of video, the bringing of files into the system, the delivering them into a database or asset management system, understanding the architecture of our storage, and what concerns and elements we have to be aware of. We're going to take a break and stimulate you with a bit more coffee to keep you awake. And then we're going to look into archive. Archive has obviously become a very important element to us in our file-based world. And then we're going to talk about how we can manipulate those files in post-production, and then lead further on into the final file creation for the broadcast deliverables and the actual deliverable file. So right from the very start of acquisition through to the final transmission copy is where we're going to take you through today. So before we start, the first section we're going to do is introduction, which I'm in charge of, and there's no score on that, so I'm a winner already, so that's really good news. And I thought it would be really worthwhile just talking to you about ROOT6. I think some of the elements of who ROOT6 are a company represent the changes in our business. But fundamentally, ROOT6 started in 1997. At the time, we all worked for a company called Avid, you may have heard of them, and we were product management, business management, etc., elements of Avid. And really what we were seeing is, and we were obviously seeing this inside Avid, was several changes were occurring. Obviously one of the main changes was the merger of IT-based equipment into our industry. Pretty much before Avid, we had custom-built hardware to deal with video. There was no other way of actually manipulating media. The idea of moving 270 megabits per second of media across a network, you say that to an IT person then, they'll just laugh at you when they were pretty much up to 10 megabits was their peak speed. So we were moving 270 megabits across that BNC cable, which is phenomenal. And even today, it's actually a very fast way of moving media around. So, but we were seeing that IT merger. But what we were also seeing is a very changing role in manufacturing. Whereas that we had that custom hardware, so that hardware and that software all built in one, was sold as one unit from the manufacturer. We're now seeing that a media composer edit suite, if we look at today, may involve 10 different manufacturers. And actually, each one of those manufacturers do not want to sell the other manufacturer's equipment. They will say, here's my software, you need to plug it on your HP or your Mac, and you need to buy an Atto card, and you need this, etc., and monitors here. And that was becoming an issue. What that meant is the reseller needed to become much more manufacturer mindset. Suddenly, we were actually going to be building and creating the systems. And there are two elements of that. First of all, obviously, we need to have the knowledge to cope with that. But secondly, we need to have the ability to support that. The key is you don't want to phone up, you've got a problem with your media composer, you phone it up and have a go, it sounds like your Atto card. Okay, I'll phone up Atto, you phone up Atto, dial 1 for Atto sales, dial 2 for Atto marketing, and dial 57 for Atto support. And you don't want to do that. So the idea is we had to be a reseller who can give you one telephone number to cover support for all of those elements, and that was very, very strong for us. And we saw that as a major change in the way the reseller channel was going on, and obviously an opportunity for us. So ROOT6 was created, that's the key element to our sales. But in addition to that, we also saw the future of glue and integration of workflows coming forward much more quickly than ever conceived before. So typically our glue products in our video and broadcast was boxes. We had analog to digital converters, parallel to serial converters. We managed and manipulated electronic signals through hardware boxes to allow the glue to actually move between different products. When we move into a file-based workflow, those glue products are now software. To make workflow work, we have to have customizable software to allow that flow of data. And we saw that as a really important element. So we invested in development, and we started working in very custom development projects to begin with. I've highlighted 3 of those there. We had a project in 2000 for DHL, which was a really interesting project at the time. DHL had a communication problem with their South American region. And I think this is a really nice demonstration of how media is being used in such a wide diversity of applications now. But they felt the best way to re-engage South America was to put training videos and mission statements onto every employee's desktop in South America. So this is in 2000. And 2000 doesn't sound like a long time ago. In technology terms, it's a decade. It's a millennium. I mean, it was just quite scary. So we had MPEG-1 was the only codec we could use that was reliable. Our bandwidth connections, Chile, we had 16K bandwidth connections for 2 hours a day. Does anyone know what 16K is anymore? You've got more on your phone, obviously. But, you know, and then obviously if you think of that user experience, how do we deal with that user experience? You know, we didn't have Flash, and browser video wasn't really up to it. So we had to extend servers onto the LANs, and then we had to change the network topology to cope with the bandwidth to enable us to actually find the best route of getting back the media down to their system. And that became, you know, a really exciting project for us, and that extended in that, one of the interesting, because we had a database managing all that functionality, so now we start introducing asset management. So this is before these terms are conceived. So desktop video, database functionality, edge-based servers, we were bringing into things. So we pretty much invented a cloud-based system in 2000 to manage this area. But what became very interesting was that database. Every user had their own individual login, and that database actually recorded when they watched the video, but also how they watched the video. So we could track if the media was fast-forwarded or at any point, and we report back to the training department or the production department saying, look, this video is really boring, everyone's fast-forwarding it, so you need to readapt it and do those things. But equally, it became part of the employee appraisal process. So they would actually get marked. So, well, why haven't you watched that video? You failed in this area, you haven't watched this video. And we were quite surprised by that. So it was a very interesting application of how that metadata and that asset management information was taken into further elements. And that becomes very relevant as we go on from there. So that carried on. Reality TV was born. Reality TV, you know, equally brought in, you know, a whole new world of problems for us. The Big Brothers, where we had 150 cameras, you know, and we had to produce a 30-minute program every day from those cameras, caused quite a lot of challenges. So we had to develop software that not only recorded that media, but first of all, we need to record that media and give it time code. Obviously, the media we were working with at the time had no time code facility. And then we had to synchronize a database with that time code so we can log all those events. So what would happen there, basically the producers would see an event, something would happen in the Big Brother house or the Shatter TV or whichever reality TV program it was, and they see an event happen, and then they backtrack through the database to work the story to that event. Okay, so now suddenly I had to create a producer interface to interface with that database to work out how they can see the media, watch the story, and then time code mark it, etc., and go on through there. And then ultimately we deliver an ALE or an AAF into the Avid setup, which will conform it from the tape that we're recording in the system. So again, it's early asset management, remote logging systems, etc., are really important to things. Finally, the last element that brought to us was when we start really dealing with codecs. And we're going to talk about files and codecs later on, but the complication of dealing with those. And we had an internet-based asset management company who were very much targeting the advertising agencies. And obviously, you know, the idea of centralized-based short-form programming on the web it was perfect. The problem was, at that time, you know, the codecs going up were random, random frame sizes, random frame rates, etc. on the systems, random codecs in its entirety. So when the advertising exec come to play their codecs, typically they didn't have the right codecs installed on their laptop. The laptop wasn't capable of playing the performance of the codec, and you know, it would be a mismatch of codecs. So it was a real disaster, and the whole project was failing because of that reason. So the agent says, well, look, what we want is we want a box we can put in our boardroom, we can build show reels that play out on our boardroom monitor, or it can give us a DVD we can give out to our clients. So we developed a set-top box technology that allowed us to directly access the database in the cloud at the time, or the internet at the time, it would take all of that media and it would auto-play, scale, frame rate convert into a single stream onto the boardroom monitor, or actually create a DVD from this. And suddenly that simple DVD-style navigation and that automation, that process, really transformed that whole business. And that, you know, pretty much every agency in the world has at least one of those boxes now running their boardroom suites. It did take us a little bit further on in that we became very important into award ceremonies. So Cannes Lions took up our technology. Originally, the Cannes Lions Festival used to hand a tape in, and they used to tape edit the show reels, you know, as the qualifying process went on. They changed that so everything was uploaded to Beam TV. Okay, the Beambox, you then create the show reel, and it would just instantly play back that show reel. And as the voting was going on through the award ceremony, what we were doing is we were just changing the order of the database, and we immediately had the new show reel to play according to the qualifying stages. You can imagine the time saving, the labour saving, etc. involved in that process was fantastic. And they still use that technology as of today, so that's been very good for us. So that really introduced us in that whole world of file-based workflow, asset management systems, codecs, media player engines. And from that, we really started to understand the real problems in introducing file-based workflows into our workplace. And we conceived the product called Content Agent, which we'll feature later on in our presentation, but a very exciting time for us. So a brief introduction to ROOT6. Say we obviously now run on multiple departments, but one of the things we like to say is that ROOT6 very much leads itself through support. You know, we put a heavy investment in support. We have one of the biggest support departments. We have 11 Avid ACSRs, for example. Obviously, we're qualified across multiple platforms, from Adobe to Final Cut to Avid, and across multiple storage elements, and obviously multiple networks. And that's worked very well for us. And I've put a list of some of the people that we deal with, and there's been some interesting transitions. I certainly would have said 7 years ago, typically we wouldn't have been involved in a broadcaster. And I think what's changed and why we're so heavily involved in the broadcaster now, 7 years ago, you would have bought one system from one manufacturer. So to maintain reliability, to get that single phone line support, you would have gone to a single manufacturer. The reality is today, our file-based workflows are hybrid manufacturers. And that's come about now because we've got some great standards. That means if we adhere to those standards, we can get data to flow. So because of that now, we have much more hybrid manufacturer workflows. But again, from our perspective, that means we can still offer one telephone number for that entire solution. So that's been really, really good for us. So obviously, I mentioned broadcast there. Some interesting corporate, as I say, just that spread of media applications has been going very, very strong for us. Sales, I mentioned, I think we have 50% of the sales department here today. Are they in the room? Anyone from sales in the room? Oh, well done. But one of the things I found very interesting with sales is the mentality is now we don't actively go out and sell product today. What we do is we actively go out and sell solutions. We look at the workflow, analyze what's required to do, and then we plug products in as the last part of that process. So it's a very, very different approach on what goes on those elements. And as you can see there, you think we'd have much more focus on our product. And if you take storage, for example, you know, we have a wide-ranging selection of storage. But the reality is we need that variety of storage to absolutely get the very best optimization for the solution we're providing. So it's good for us to be expertise across the elements, and then we'll choose each storage for each niche. And you're going to hear later on, we talk about feature checkboxes and brochure design. And the reality, successful file-based workflow is in the detail. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later on. You need to be very, very careful about the detail. Because if you designed your workflow based on the brochures given to you by all the manufacturers, I can guarantee it won't work. So be careful of that. We obviously brought in our own SI elements several years ago now. I'm going to highlight a few. So we had much more traditional post-production environments like MTV. You know, we obviously had a Unity and lots of symphonies, but we were routing video and audio around based on BNCs. Recently that's changed to people like NPC, where we're putting big 10 gigabit Ethernet infrastructures into the system. So we have a 10 gigabit backbone with every floor having gigabit Ethernet going out to the workstation. So that's quite an interesting one. I put ITV up there. There's a current installation we're building at the moment. So we're managing the move for ITV into the Manchester Salford Quay. So I think we've got 72 racks of equipment going into that scenario. So it's quite a big project for us, and it seems to be going very well at the moment, despite builders, as they say. So finally, two other elements. Training. We created our own training elements. We did this very selfishly, to be honest, because the better you guys are trained, the less support calls we get. So that's quite a selfish reason to do it. But also, we start seeing a very different community arrive in our industry. And you can hear some phrases last time like laptop and cut and paste communities. But really, we're seeing a lot of people arrive who really didn't have that technical expertise and understanding of the basics of video and audio. They really knew the creative tools, they understood their way around Media Composer or Final Cut or Adobe. They're absolutely great in that. But the reality is, you still need to appreciate that this is video and audio, especially in the broadcast world. Okay, and they didn't appreciate those elements. So we introduced these introduction courses. These are half-day courses to take people through the basics of Video 101, the basics of audio, introduce digital file formats, and make people much more technically aware. Because I think we certainly do believe that creative people, if they understand the constraints of the technical elements, will be much better people. And this train's gone very well from us. We run it on a quarterly basis up in our office, but we also do a lot of on-site training. So, for example, today we're training at Disney for the next 2 days. We're just doing timeline, we're talking to Discovery, and we're coming in and helping them actually migrate their staff forward and understand the technicalities of video and audio. So it's been quite a new area for us, and it's been very worthwhile. So finally, I obviously mentioned that we have our own R&D and development department, and we launched that in 2004 with its own brand under ROOT6 Technology, and that was the creation of a content agent. So for that element, we obviously have a much more international business. I won't go too much into content agent because you can see some of that later on. Obviously, the key now is, Deluxe, for example. I think we are now in every office in Deluxe throughout the world, with the exception of Rome. So hopefully Rome in, I think, May is quite a nice time, I think. So I might be popping down there. But obviously, some big people like DreamWorks and that have changed all of their transcoding farm to content agent, and obviously, really good broadcasting scenarios and production scenarios up there on the wall. Excellent. So that is drawing us to the end of the introduction. So as I say, one of the key things here is we've brought the technology to this room. Everything's here. We're not going to do this all through PowerPoint. We're going to be doing live presentations of file-based workflow and products throughout the whole element. So what we have is we have a centralized online storage system. We chose Avid ISIS in this scenario, and that's managed with Interplay, and we're going to talk about those elements. We're bringing video in with DVS Venice, and we're also going to talk about file-based capture with Content Agent. We're then going to be manipulating and managing the archive and tiered storage with Object Matrix and XenData and Altio tape drives. We'll talk a little bit about editing and introduce Eyeon Fusion, and then we're going to take you about creation. Again, we're going to bring Content Agent in the game, but we're also going to talk about QC with VidChecker, and we're also going to be talking about Master View and Aspera for WAN acceleration. So I'm pleased to say I'm going to take you to the first stage of this, and we're going to talk about legacy video capture. And I get to shut up now and hand you over to David. So here you go, David.
So the first application we're going to look at is Venice, and this is the Venice client software. It's currently installed on the Z800 workstation, and the Venice server is just in our rack here. So you can have the Venice software, the client software, installed on multiple workstations throughout your facility. It runs on Mac, Windows, and Linux. So here you can see we've got 4 channels within our Venice here. If you have multiple Venice devices around your facility, you could connect to them from the client application and use the channels as and when you need them. So you can notice along the very top here we've got our 4 channels. So we've got Ingest 1, Ingest 2, transcode and playout. So I've just labelled those up for this today, but you could label them a little bit more, depending on your workflow and things like that. So within Venice you have 3 modes. So there's Ingest, there's playout, and transform, which is transcode. So I think one of the key features with Venice is the fact that you can change the modes from one to the other, instantly. There's a lot of capture and playout devices where you have to buy specific boxes, channels to do specific roles. So here we've currently selected Ingest mode. If I wanted to select playout, I just change it to playout, and we can here load up a file and start playing out. Actually, I want to ingest, so I'm going to just change it straight back to ingest. So moving down a little bit further, another key feature is you can do audio routing within the Venice on ingest. So if you were taking a satellite feed or a studio feed, and the audio channels aren't exactly how you want them in the post, to save you some time, remapping and moving around within Media Composer or your Final Cut Pro or Premiere, you can actually start to do your audio mapping and routing, as the ingest comes in. So then that takes that sort of strain away a bit further on. A little bit further down, we have our output settings. So this is our file that we're going to create. So at the moment, you can see here, we've got .mov, we've got DPX, MXF. So I think it's worth mentioning that all these codecs are licensed from the codec manufacturers rather than a third party. So as the codecs mature, it'll be pushed straight into the product rather than having to wait for third parties to get that codec and then moving on. Venice was actually the first Linux-based system to have the Apple ProRes codec license from Apple. So we'll choose that one. So we're going to use ProRes HQ. And then a little bit further down here, we get to choose our destination. So with this Venice here, we've got 6 terabytes of internal storage. It can connect to network attached storage as well. So bandwidth depending on what you're capturing and the number of streams. For this, we're just going to capture straight to the internal RAID storage. And then there's a file name at the bottom, which is just called Pinewood Team at the moment. So I'm just going to select record. So that's recording a ProRes HQ from our live feed in on channel 2. So if I move along to channel 3, which is our transcode, there's a clip in the middle which is selected. You can just see here it's an XDCAM HD. And much like before, we can choose a specific output. So again, we've got a ProRes, we've got a .mov. So this could be your station format, or we could create a different file. We're going to just create a DVC Pro HD 100. Again, you choose your locations. This is going to go to the transcode folder within the local storage. So then that starts transcoding or rewrapping depending on your codecs. And you'll notice just in the middle at the top here, we've got a frames per second. So we've just shot up to 89 frames per second. So it's doing faster than real time transcode from our source to our destination. And finally, we've got our sort of SDI monitor, which is kind of swamped with the large screen. But this is our sort of our traditional VT playback. On the right-hand side, we've got a playlist, so you can start loading up clips. You can use a mark in, mark out, and you can play that file. And then you can start to create a playlist on the right, and that's pushing out, baseband video. So applications for this would be, it could be into a studio record, into a studio. So on channel 1 or 2, you could be recording the output of your mixing desk of the studio. Channel 3, you could be playing in your VT inserts, which you've queued up in the playlist on the right-hand side. And channel 4 could be another playout, could be, driving a screen or a plasma within the facility. So you can kind of see that, the Venice is quite a versatile tool and you can do a lot of things with it. So if we dive back to our, our heads-up display, we can see exactly what's going on. We've got, 1 record, 1 transforming, and 1 playback device. It supports VDCP and 422 as well, so you can have DEC control, so you can do a lot of data migration for archiving from Digibeta or Betacam into a file format using a Venice, and you can have DEC controls as well. Control interfaces for driving it as a typical VTR. So hopefully you can see it's quite a versatile studio post-production device. Another feature which we'll go into further in depth now is the fact that it can do growing files within an MXF workflow.
Cool. So let's just understand growing files. But there is an element of detail again that, I mentioned that feature check on your brochure. If we don't appreciate it, can catch you out. So with our legacy video, we obviously have the ability to have growing files. And that very simply means is that we're able to start editing the file as it's being recorded. That doesn't sound, a crazy feature. It seems very obvious that we need those functions. And so very simple, we can actually start recording that media with our record head, and then our playback head, our edit suite, etc., can actually start picking up that media as it's coming down. And very simply, if we start editing that, if we get ahead of ourselves, as that playback head gets ahead of itself, the system simply reports capture still in progress, and you can't touch this file yet. One of the main elements of this is detail. So why do we want to edit whilst we're recording? Well, we've got time of turnaround. We've got speed. We really need to get our highlights packages out. Perhaps we're going to do highlights of the show as its progression. We may have a play-up screen actually in the theatre or in the studio, and we need to be able to get that information out there immediately. So one of the key elements is how long does it take us before we can actually start editing the material. And you actually see some machines are actually several minutes before you can start doing it, and that's just too late. One of the nice things with Venice is that we can actually achieve that within 80 frames of start capture. So 80 frames once you start capturing, you can start editing that material, and that's very, very key to us. So as I said earlier on, one of the things we're going to do is live demos of those elements. So David's now going to take us through a live capture process and actually going to start editing that material. So I'll pass you back to David.
So we're on channel 1 now, much like channel 2 when we were setting up our ProRes capture. A little bit further down here you can see we've got MXF, so we're going to select MXF for ISIS and interplay. So this is going to be in our Avid workflow, and we're going to select here a DNX 120. So instead of selecting our local destination, our Venice volume, our internal storage, what we're actually doing, we're using web services between the Venice and the Avid interplay. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a DNX 120 file. We're going to actually write it directly onto our tier 1 storage, our ISIS, and we're going to check in that AF file into the interplay. So then the editors can just grab that file and continue editing without having to go, looking for that file. So within the interplay here, so we'll go further on about interplay, but it's basically a database and a tree. So we've got something set up here, called incoming media, and then a directory called Venice. So this recording is going to be pushed into that location. So select record, and that channels into record and creating that file. So if I dive over into Media Composer, we've got our interplay window here, and I can do a very quick search for anything happening within the last 10 minutes. So we can see our file is already there. Our media status is green. I think that's quite a key factor because there's a lot of capture devices pushing stuff into interplay where they have difficulties with their media status. And then when you try and do further things with that, it starts getting very complicated within the Avid sort of world. You'll also notice that the logo has sort of the top right-hand corner missing. This is showing us that it's a growing file, so that file isn't complete. So I can play that file straight back from our interplay window, or typically you drag it into your live feed bin here and then load it up. And I can use JKNL as normal, mark in, mark out, and I can just add that straight into my sequence. So it's a standard clip as you'd expect. If I scroll too far, as mentioned before, you get the capture in progress status. So that's we're going into the future. Once the file's finished recording within Venice, you update from interplay, and that just becomes a regular clip, and you carry on going. So from here, you can see that you can start to collaborate, content that's already been created before, and stuff that's a live feed. So if you're doing, say, like a race here, and you wanted to do a highlights package of all the crashes very quickly, you can get that sort of straight into your Media Composer without too many sort of hoops. So hopefully that shows you how quick we can get content in from legacy video into Media Composer in this example.
Cool, thank you. So what we're doing now is we've obviously brought legacy video in. We've obviously started to introduce files, and that we talked about the transform node, and obviously we talked about delivering into the Avid setup into the native MXF OP atom file structure. So let's just take a slight digression. And let's try and understand what a file is. One of the biggest issues we see quite often is clients saying, well, I just want a QuickTime file. Why is it complicated? And hopefully you all appreciate why that's just not enough information. So let's just understand the structure of a file and bring it together. So clearly there are multiple elements of a file before we even reach that point where we call it a QuickTime. So first of all, we have our video layer. And if we look at our video layer, there are several elements to us. So even before we start thinking about compression. So imagine when we think about video layer, we think about MPEG-2 and MPEG-1 and H.264 and JPEG, etc. So even before we have to start thinking about that, we've got to start thinking about aspect ratios and frame rate. Now, we may think, well, that's not complicated. It's, what is it, 4:3, 14:9, 16:9? It's not that much. Well, in the file-based world, there are no standards. Okay? Although we try to conform to standards, we can deal with any aspect ratio you like. So, for example, London Underground, we actually deliver codecs in portrait. So we can actually start manipulating. We could obviously be receiving those files in very different formats as well. So we've got to deal with it. We have now infinite variables on those systems. And this really starts becoming a problem where we are now finding a lot of consumer-based equipment being used in our broadcast and film-based environments. And we'll talk about that in a moment. So frame rate can go on. We did a project last year for Google, for the YouTube movie. that was called Life in a Day. And they went out to the YouTube community and they said, we want to produce a movie about what happened on July the 10th, 2010. Send us in your video. So they received 85,000 clips. And they went, oh shit, we go to the Sundance in 5 months. How do we deal with this? So we had 85,000 random codecs, random frame rates, random frame sizes. They range from 6 frames a second to 60 frames per second, and every frame size and elements you can never think of. And we had to get that into a 24-frame Avid DNX project. So we had a lot of issues that we had to do. And the other really interesting thing is none of them had time code. So it was a fun project. So what actually happened in that project in the end is we actually automated the whole process of how we could analyze the clip, create a transform to get it into the right format, deliver it into the Avid system with DNX06. We populated metadata into their system as well. And then what we did is they actually reduced the final movie to 4,500 clips. And what we were able to do is reconform those clips, but as a clip. We couldn't go down to time code, that's a whole clip. But because we put the clips into the Avid with a timecode track, when we retranscode it and remap that timecode track, the auto-conform worked really well. So we were able to achieve that 5-month production with 85,000 pieces of media. So that was really good. So there's a lot of complexity in those things. And one of the biggest issues we really do suffer is gamut. When we start moving from one file format to another file format, we find there are lots of gamut issues. In our broadcast industry, we very much understand standard definition of 601, high definition of 709. But when we start bringing consumer elements into it, it's a very, very different world. We typically work in a restricted gamut space. In other words, when we actually digitize our material, our black starts at 16 and our white finishes at 245. And what that means is we've got headroom either end. Typically in the consumer world, we find black starts at 0 and white finishes at 255. So as you can imagine, when you transform that without any calibration for that process, all your colors get washed out. So if you've ever had the experience where your colors are washed out in your transcode process, it means you're moving between different gamut spaces and you're not correcting for that as you go on. So we provide tools for doing those elements. So the video layer is actually a very, very complicated layer on its own right. And as I say, that's even before we start applying compression sequences into it. Next, we obviously have our audio layer. It equally has, varying codecs, varying sampling rates, various other elements involved in it. Audio tends not to be as complicated because by the nature of its size and its ease to process across the different formats. But we need to be aware of that. Probably the biggest element that catches us out is when we're dealing with Dolby E. What we do find, most scenarios won't decode Dolby E. So what the key is make sure that we can pass the Dolby E file through in Unity. In other words, we don't modify it in any way or form. Interestingly enough, we find a lot of video cards actually reclock it. And that means you completely screw up the decompression afterwards. So again, there's an element of detail to be very careful about. They may say, oh yeah, we're uncompressed with this process, but if they apply any modification to that Dolby E stream, then you're going to lose the encoding technology. So typically, we need to make sure that we can pass Dolby E, and it truly does go in and out without no modification. Or typically we have external decoders and encoders, and we actually hand it in its discrete channels is where it typically happens. So we've got our video and our audio layer. We still haven't reached our wrapper. We now need to think about how are those two layers locked together. And that really comes about with our multiplexer. So our multiplexer arrives, and this is the process of stitching that video and audio together. And in this scenario, we'll typically hear about program streams and transport streams in our broadcast scenario. But when we start dealing with our video on demand or our streaming mechanisms, we then enter into a very complicated world. Because now we have to really start considering what type of server that media is going to be streamed off, and then how we want to affect our buffering in order to maintain our video and audio elements in sync during that streaming process. So there are a lot of very complicated elements there. Probably one of the masters of actually handling that arena is a product called Manzanita, which we work with quite a lot. And certainly for video on demand and certainly for streaming devices, that's our favored choice. We have been working with other manufacturers now, but typically we test on Manzanita, get it right on Manzanita, learn about it from there, and then speak to the other manufacturer and say, look, this is why your multiplexer is not working. You need to go off and fix this, and here's how to do it. So we're slowly getting there, but it's been a complicated arena. So finally, we now reach that stage of a wrapper. And this is where we truly can start talking about QuickTime and AVI and MPEG, etc. So hopefully from that, we can understand why somebody can't ask for a QuickTime movie. they need to really give us a lot more detail about what's going on. So that wrapper now presents all of that information as a single file to us with all of that technical detail, allowing us to be able to decode and play back that material. And that's obviously very critical. The key with the wrapper, though, is it really stops at technical metadata layer. There obviously are some wrappers that gives us a small amount of production data, and obviously there's the option of timecode track with QuickTime and many other devices. But we're very much limited to technical data to travel with that file. So we again go to our last stage, and this sort of a good way of graphically representing this is we then have our container. And this is really now an area for MXF. So we really like this in the broadcast fraternity, because now with OP1A, we can present a single file. It tends to have an industry international standard about how to approach that file. And those standards are pretty much generated by SyncT and by AMRA, are the two things. And we're going to talk about those later on. And then not only can we embed all of that wrapper, video, audio, multiplexing details, we can now also embed XML data for metadata. So now we can put production metadata into that container to keep that all in one file. So that's a great way for us to work in. And obviously now we've introduced the concept of XML as a means of moving metadata around. So we'll talk about that later on. So one of the Golden Globe of codecs, I think, has to go to Sony. I think they did a fantastic job of looking at that diagram and saying, how many of these elements can we put into one container? And they did a really good job with XDCAM. So XDCAM is an MPEG-2 video stream. So that's great. PCM audio. It's multiplex as a transport stream. So that's good. It's then wrapped in MPEG-4 wrapper. So yeah, well done. Another strange anomaly there. It's then placed into an MXF OP1A container. And rather than putting the metadata in the container, there's a sidecar XML element to it as well. So, well done, Sony. I really appreciate that. You made our lives easy. The only good news on that, it is a consistent standard, almost. There's always a bit flexible. The Canon implementation of the MXF OP1A XD-CAM format is actually different to the Sony one. So again, we have to deal with those elements. So again, be warned, the detail is the key to these things. So they did a great job. I'm really proud of them. But there's a great example, and that's actually one of the reasons why we have to deal with the card structure rather than the actual finished file structure with the Sony XD-CAM. We'll talk about that later on. So I mentioned earlier on is that typically today we apply file-based workflows, file-based systems into tape-based workflows. But there's so much more we can do with file-based now, and especially now we're standardizing with asset management and metadata elements. And really one of the key phrases is automation. We can now apply a significant amount of automation. And there are several ways that we can do automation. Pretty much up until today, we really look at automation in the form of watch folders. And what watch folders do, very simply, is you point a workflow at a folder, and when there's activity in that folder, it triggers that watch folder. So it's pretty much the modern day GPI. It's very manual. Typically there's going to be a manual element involved in that because we're not really moving great amounts of metadata. But it does trigger things on those elements. One of the big issues with detail in this area is product. Do you support watch folders? Tick box. Go. Oh, we'll buy that one then. Right, here's my 10 workflows. Oh, we only support one watch folder. Okay, so watch out for the detail. We've certainly seen that in several scenarios where that becomes very painful. But what's much more interesting now is the idea of web services that's coming out. And we're obviously seeing AMRA at the moment are conceiving a standard that manufacturers are starting to take up as an idea. And certainly DVS have actually done the first implementation of FIMS, but a standard about how a web service and standardized hooks about how we can interface with external applications and get that transition of workflows and media and metadata moving between us. So we're actually really excited about that. But we actually already have a lot of web services going today with various other manufacturers. And what's great about web services is not just the trigger point, we actually are opening up our architectures between each other and actually transposing, not only triggering the event, passing metadata, getting it to react to that metadata, selecting templates, but then also what we're doing is we're tracking the progress of that event, so we can see in our job queues where the progress is for that event, and then actually receiving the information back and sharing that database together again. So suddenly it really becomes an integral part of our workflow. And again, we will show some elements of that later on. So web services are becoming very exciting for that. Thereafter, we're really into programmatic interfaces, APIs, and where we actually are dedicated writing software to deal with low-level integration of products. And there are obviously a lot of products there where we actually want to get quite deep into the code to actually control it and automate those things. And we're going to see a lot of API development because automation doesn't just, we don't stop automation just at the process of media. We want automation to actually encourage our scheduling system. We want automation to start from our job management system. Ideally, what we want is we want a job number come in, the description from the client, what it does. We want the bookings people to type all that detail in and press go, and then we want it to automate all the way from that point onwards. That technology is completely available today, and we can do that. And we have a few applications where we're doing that today. But we can really get to that layer of automation now on the system. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to take you across to Content Agent, and we're going to have a look at bringing in file-based ingest and automating the delivery of that file to our various scenarios. So I've got a few files here. Here's my XDCAM file. There we go. So I can explore that card. I can see in that card I've got several clips or several essence files actually within that card. And I can also view the sidecar, the XML, and do that. And then obviously I can manipulate and design a workflow from there. What I thought I would do for you, everyone, is bring that good old standard, I don't know, I'd hate to think of the percentage of broadcast TV, but we're in certainly double-figure percentages of material that we come into broadcast TV today that's come from non-time-coded sources. Canon 5D is obviously a big favourite, the GoPro camera, various mobile phones, etc. that actually get on there. But they don't have time codes. So how do we deal with those elements with no time codes? So we've been working on some ideas of how to do that. And one of the most interesting things is typically these devices do have a clock. So we can get time of day into the file. So for GoPro, for example, when it completes a recording on the camera, it actually stamps the time that it completed the recording into the file. So if we can get all the GoPro cameras on the same time of day, we've got a close element of time code on there. So at least we can use that. Alternatively, you can get the clapperboard. There's an iPad app that you can record that and actually stamp a time coding through that process. The problem is now is how do we get that into the file? And one of the nice things Content Agent does, if I actually take this file, here's my GoPro file. I've got a little tool that means I can add a timecode metadata. So this file now has timecode. So there's my QuickTime file, and as you can see here now, I now have a timecode element somewhere. Do I go past it? It's a live demo. There it is. As always, this is why we need automation, because human error is just so great. But as you can see, it's actually stamped a midnight timecode. It's obviously put the timecode, end timecode as the duration of the clip. I may not want to work that. I actually want to work with time of day. I've actually stamped my clip. So I can simply map my time of day into here. So what's the time now? It's actually 11:29. So 11:29, we'll do that. And I happen to know this is the Pinewood roadshow clip. So there's my media. It's now got timecode and everything else. But obviously that only exists inside Content Agent. That's not much use for me. So I now need to deliver that to the Avid system. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to say, right, I'm going to set that clip. I don't want to work in AMA. I actually want to work in DNX. So let me go to check into Avid, and I'll just look at this workflow. So I'm quickly going to convert that into a DNX 185 file, and then I'm actually going to deliver that automatically to the interplay. So let's just save this and run that job, new job. And what you'll see down here now, on the bottom left here, I'm actually now starting that transcode. So it's actually going to take that H.264 file. It's actually now going to transcode that to DNX 185. We're currently doing that at 55 frames per second. And then what you'll see is you're going to see it jump across to deliver it to the interplay. And I'm going to switch you over very quickly to Dave when we get to the end of this, and he'll show you that file. But the beauty is we'll show you how that metadata has traveled through the system as well. So here we go. We finished transcode. We're now delivering to interplay. If I take you to David.
So we're back in Media Composer with our interplay window. So I can do as before, select the last 10 minutes to find any clips. And we can see that the clip is here, or I can go to the actual interplay tree, and I know that anything that's coming from Content Agent is coming into the incoming media from Content Agent. So if we just go back to our search and find that clip, I can just drag that straight into the window here and start playing it, or the bin. And you can notice at the top there, we've got our time code starting at 11:29. I can do a mark in, mark out. It doesn't quite fit with my theme or my sequence, but you can see that we've just put together a legacy video and car-based media into one sequence quite easily.
Cool. So there you go. Non-time-coded source now into an edit environment, time-coded, locked, ready to go. That we've saved a significant amount of time on a lot of reality productions just by having that simplified process. And obviously where I entered that time code, I could actually enter that. I could highlight all those clips and actually map them down to the same time code in one click. So it's really, really very powerful to do it. So let's just consider what else do we want to do when we ingest our files? What other elements? Obviously, I've just delivered to editorial. I think one of our biggest issues we have when we start dealing with file-based acquisition is the delete button. It's probably one of the most scariest buttons that we've got to press. But the reality is we've got to delete that media off those cards. So how do we do that with conviction? You know, how can we feel confident about doing it? And really the key to that is to make sure that when we've copied that file off, we truly have copied it with full integrity. And the way we manage that is we use a process called MD5 checksums. So what MD5 checksums is they scan that entire file and they create this checksum, which means we can actually truly compare that with our delivered file and make sure they match each other, and therefore we know that bit by bit those files actually match and it truly has been copied off correctly. So what I've got here is a simple look workflow. There's my extract MD5 checksum. So my card comes in here. First of all, we extract an MD5 checksum of that card. We then do a network copy of that card, and we copy it to our server or to our archive system, and we'll talk about the automation of that process later on. Once we've copied that server, we then do another MD5 checksum. So we've now got the two MD5 checksums, the original and actually the finished delivered copy. And we have a really nice little feature called the decision node. And what the decision node, not only does it allow us to apply Boolean style review of metadata or clip titles, etc., but it also allows me to compare metadata. So the beauty is that I've asked it to compare the two checksums, and are they equal? So it's very simple. All I've asked to do is, are they equal? And it gives me a true or false scenario. If it's true, great. I can update and store the clip and go away, and now someone can go and delete it. If it's failed, then what I can do is I'll store the clip somewhere else. And what I'll do, in this scenario, I've sent an email to the QC person or the machine room operator saying, we've got a problem with this clip, you need to come and have a look at it because I can't copy it over properly. So we can give you that security in that process of what's going on. So first of all, we can now do proper MD5 checksums. We can do integrity of file, which means we can give you confidence in pressing delete. So delete button done. There are several elements. We deliver to the Avid. I showed you that earlier on. We may want to send the preview copies around to people to look at. So typically we're going to create a low bandwidth H.264. And this scenario I've done sent it out as an email. I may actually upload it to an FTP site or web service or a network folder, etc. Or maybe I'll create an MPEG-2 copy and actually create a DVD for distribution. And some of the nice little features are I could burn in a graphic, the name of the producer, etc., and have different templates on there. So now I can do my daylist deliverables out to everyone to look at the clips. And then the last little element said we may be checking into a different asset management system, maybe our library system, that's not our interplay, etc. In which case, I've really got to start thinking about metadata. So in this scenario, I've transcoded it into my master format or my archive format. I've actually copied it to the file. And then what I'm also doing is I'm doing an XML transform. So not only do we have to deal with video and audio transcoding, we need to think about metadata transcoding as well. What XML transform does is pretty much most devices will take an XML schema for how they're going to bring data in. Unfortunately, there isn't a standard. Everyone has their own unique standard of how that XML schema is set up. So I can load my asset management XML schema into this window here, and then I can just map my metadata, field names, into it. So I can have multiple different schemas with metadata being transformed into each one of those elements. So rather than you having to develop scripts and have programmers on board, you can just use this basic function and we will equally deliver the metadata into your system in the correct format ready for it to receive it. So now what it's got is I've got two files in the same folder. They're both called the same name, and the asset management system will recognize they're called the same name and will recognize that they're XML and that they're media, and will merge them into its library. So that's typically the way we work in most of the systems. But bear in mind, we're doing an XML transfer, and that's an important element. So we talked about automation, and I've presented 4 or 5 different workflows there to actually get just the process of delivering a file format. So let's actually just go back to our MD5 checksum again. So there's my MD5 checksum. I also want to check it into my Avid setup, so let's check it into Avid. So that's okay. So there's my Avid setup. So obviously, if the file is good, I want to check it into my Avid, so I'll link that up. I also want to do my preview distribution, so we'll bring that into the workflow as well. So here we are, and again, we'll link these files up to the system. So the key is, when we really start sitting and thinking about our workflows, they can become quite complicated. The idea is we want to bring the simple tools into doing that in. So let's just do our last one, which is our PAM. Okay, there's our ham on there, and squeeze this down a little bit. Bring that into the system. Great, so this is my dailiest workflow. I now have the ability to do MD5 checksums for doing it. I've delivered to my editorial, I've delivered from my preview distribution list, and I've actually delivered into my asset management system. I'll just tidy that up a little bit. Nice. In fact, what we'll do is we'll just move these over here. So we get a view of that system. So the beauty is now I've got all of those workflows synchronized together. I can now store that under a different workflow name, and equally now I can trigger that workflow as one event. Whether it's a watch folder, whether it's an API trigger, whether it's you know, an XML trigger. There are multiple ways I can trigger it, and it will just handle that for me automatically every day. So once you set that up for your production, maybe that production is running for the next 3, 6 months. We do a lot of film dailies and a lot of episodic programs. All we have to do now is just throw the media at us, and we will automate the entire process. So again, with automation, investment up front buys you significant amount of time later on. Excellent. Okay, so we're pretty much concluded on capturing media. We've talked about file-based capture, and we've talked about legacy video-based capture. But now we've got all this media. We've got this big bucket of storage, and we've got all this media. We need to manage it. This is where we get into the realms of media management or asset management systems. And again, that terminology is very misleading because it's obviously very wide-ranging in its thought process whatsoever. So we sort of think about asset management. There are actually several layers to it. It's not just one database that's just tracking all your assets. You've got several applications you want to run on it. So your asset management will be bridging, you know, from your job order system to your scheduling system. It's going to be managing your production asset management system and tracking your workflow through those processes. It could be your archive system, etc. So really the way we view asset management at the moment is that we're going to be living in a world of lots of mini asset management systems and mini mans. And that process will enable us to interchange metadata and transfer data between them so that we choose the right asset management system according to the workflow element or its responsibility that we're dealing with. So what we're going to do now, we're going to take you into one major asset management system that we're working with at the moment quite a lot, and also which is sort of injecting some very interesting futures at the moment. And we're going to talk to you about interplay production. So as I said, we've got the equipment here. So we have an Avid ISIS system, interplay server, media composer. And I'm very pleased to hand you over to David, who's going to just give you an introduction to interplay.
So the first application within the interplay set is interplay assist that we're going to look at. So I mentioned before about the database within interplay. So it's a tree database, and you can see here we've got a top folder called projects, and then within here we've got all our individual projects. So for permissions wise, you can set it up so that when you log into interplay, you only get presented with a specific folder. So then if you have your facility with different productions and jobs going on, you don't want the media, you know, being seen from one job to another. The famous analogy is Pepsi and Coca-Cola in the same facility. You know, one's doing one job, one's doing the other. They don't want to share or see each other's media. So you can set the tree up so that when you log in, you only see your specific project. Here we've got the whole tree so we can see everything. Earlier on, we were pushing media in from the Venice into the Venice folder and into the content agent folder. I think one of the key points to interplay is the fact that it's searchable. It's a database. So earlier on, I was using the last 10 minutes to find some clips. You have your free text search. So where have we been? We've been in Bristol. So I can quickly see any clips that were created when we were in Bristol. I can load that up into this player, and then I can start going through and log in, mark out. So Assist is their sort of lightweight, intuitive application. You don't have to be trained in Media Composer to use it. So I simply created a mark in, mark out, and I can create a subclip now. So I can do this work before the edit. If I just call this clip 1, and I'm going to push that into the Roadshow project, and it's in pre-edit. So these are all the subclips. So these could be all the crashes during a race or all the goals within a football match, and you can start comping them together as specific subclips. The other thing you can actually do is you can create a shot list as well. So I can just drag that straight into shot list, shot list 02. I'm going to put that straight into pre-edit. So this is sort of the new paper edit. So whereas before you do all your paper edit and work out what your sequence was going to be before you went to the expensive edit suite where your editor's overworked and underpaid typically, and your edit suite's very expensive. So you'd do your paper edit, whereas here you can get, a producer or someone on location to start, comping together media as it comes in. So I can just go back into, another project, load this up. Someone's added a marker. I can look at that marker and see what it says. I'll go back to here. Additionally, what you can do as well, as the clips are coming into in the interplay environment, it's all about metadata. So you get your typical free text. The problem with free text is that people abbreviate words and also misspell them. So when you try and find those assets, it's very difficult. So within Interplay, you can customize specific fields. So I've created one called a circuit, and I've created a drop-down list, so I can quickly, grab a circuit, and that's it there, spelt correctly. So it's easy to search. You can also create sub-lists within a category. So if you're Lotus Cup UK, you only get these options, and that's added that to that clip. So if the editor needs to quickly find, something from, Brands Hatch, well, let's do that here. So we can go back to our search, clear up Bristol and text fields. Right, I only want to search for something at Brands Hatch. And I found all the clips that are from Brands Hatch. So I can say that's from Brands Hatch. We can go back to our shot and we can just start creating our sequence here. And then we can start, viewing our sequence all before, you get to the editor. So you can have multiple people doing this throughout your facility. So that's what, Assist is. It's their lightweight, their sort of pre-editor where you can do cuts only and start adding all that metadata, which will make life a lot easier further on. So I'm just going to close that. I'm going to launch Media Composer because we'll go back into that in a minute. So what we've got here is we've got Access, which is sort of their second tool within the Interplay suite. What this is for, it's more to do with sort of the administration role and the data wranglers. So this is where you can start moving media around between projects. So if all your file-based media was coming in through the content agent into one folder, you could then start pushing that into the specific jobs and roles within your facility. Also, you have things called reservations. So you want to get away from the aspect or the risk of having editors or people deleting the media when it's not finished with. So you can actually add a reservation to a file and say, right, this media, this sequence, this project isn't going to be deleted until this date, and only an administrator can delete it or overwrite them. So that's one of the good things with that. Also, when you start looking at sequences, you can look at relatives, and it'll tell you where that piece of media is and in which sequence. So when you're thinking about deleting that, you can actually confirm that that media is finished with, rather than deleting it from your tier 1 storage and then having problems within your edit suites. So Access gives you sort of the administration role. You can move stuff within your Interplay environment from one work group or another as well. And then the third is within Media Composer. So as we mentioned before, it's all about permissions as well. So I'm about to log in here and it's asking me for a username and password. You can sort of skin that different ways. That you could have room-centric logins, or you could have specific users. It also helps with the audit trail when something does get deleted. You can find out where it was last or who did it. Some people like it, a lot of people don't. So I'm just going to log in here, and then we've got our Interplay window, which is, again, it's a very, very similar, tree structure, and you've got your search pane. So if I have a quick look at the work that I did sort of as the pre-edit, so you can see here, I've got my Pinewood rough cut, and I can load that into my viewer and start pushing that together as my final sequence. So hopefully you'll be able to see that you can start to work collaboratively. You don't have to do everything within your Media Composer, and it's all about sort of automating metadata as it comes in and being able to find and search clips. Hopefully that's giving you a good idea of what you can do with Interplay or asset management as a whole.
Cool, thank you, David. So obviously in the introduction to the Interplay production bundle, so let's just think about what we just demoed there. So we've demonstrated the Assist and the Access clients. They happen to be applications that we need to run on the desktop, and that desktop needs to be connected into that network to be able to work with those devices. And this is where we really start introducing new elements. And obviously, one of the phrases, I've got favorite phrases out there. Can I have a quick time? It works on my laptop. Why is it difficult? is a good phrase. And the other thing is, oh, let's just put it in the cloud. And sort of that statement of just put it in the cloud is like, okay, let's start back from basics, shall we, and work out what's going on there. But the reality is the cloud is a big future for us, and there are lots of advantages by going into the cloud in the system. But how do we approach going into the cloud? So let's take our Interplay production setup, shrink it down, and let's just put it in the cloud. Here it goes. Hopefully, next button maybe? Yeah, there we go. Okay, so it's into cloud now. And this is probably the reality of certainly our first implementation of cloud. The idea we can just load up a VM module onto an existing ISP service provider and run it from cloud really is non-existent at the moment. I mean, I think we can think of the cloud as a storage medium for distribution of media. It's obviously starting to get a little bit interesting for archiving. I'm not quite sure yet. But the idea of running our own private clouds and then using the internet as a means of distributing our media is actually a very exciting one. And if we can actually use it to create collaboration across the internet, that's actually very exciting. So one of the leaders at the moment in time, and we'll talk about some other manufacturers at the moment, but certainly one of the leaders at the moment is the Avid. We've seen offline products like Foreseen and A-Frame who allow you to upload your media into the cloud and allow producers to remotely log and edit that material. But its relationship with the production chain is very, very limited at this stage. What Avid have done is they've introduced two new products. They've obviously enabled you to put yourself into the cloud, so now we can access this through the internet. And the first product they've really introduced is Interplay Central. And what Interplay Central does is basically gives us that assist and access functionality through a browser interface. But now it's in a browser interface, not only is it available on my desktop, but it's also available on my mobile, and they support Android and iOS and BlackBerry. So I can now actually browse my clips, add metadata that review them, mark in and out points, and actually trigger that back, and then connect that directly into my Interplay production system that's sitting in my private cloud, which may be on my location or in my post house or in my production facility. So that gets very, very interesting. I don't need to be physically in the same location as my storage now. I can be remoted from home, or actually more interestingly, I can be remoted at the shoot or the live event and actually log that stuff through there. So that gives us one thing. So we've now got that asset management that can live, on the internet. What they've also done is brought in another product, and that's called Interplay Sphere. And this gets it very interesting, because now what I can do is I can now remote my edit suites away from the centralized system and actually interface with them across the internet. So now what they'll do is they actually allow a low resolution proxy format for me to edit that information. But that metadata interchange is still going on, so I can do all my offline editing from my bedroom at home, actually interfacing with the main production system in the office, such that when they want to carry on with the online, the scenarios where I've got to deal with that high resolution material, that material that really doesn't justify the cloud mode because the size of the file, the bandwidth of the file, and the potential rendering requirements of the file. This is one of the things that gets forgotten about in the cloud. We really don't have the rendering performance of large file abilities in the cloud at the moment in time, because our bandwidth is not just restricted by our pipe to the internet, it's restricted right through to the CPU and the RAID heads and the disk drives that we're going to be using. So we need to bear that in mind. So now suddenly I can actually do all these elements and then render my online actually in my production sound and carry on there. So these are new products introduced from Avid. We're actually quite excited about how they've done that. They seem to have done a really good job. It's taken them a long time to get there, but fortunately no one has really done it yet. I think probably one of the main elements that we're really interested in at the moment that is coming onto the scene is Adobe. So Adobe with their Creative Suite and obviously Premiere Pro have come about. And if we look at that, it's a very similar infrastructure what they've done. They clearly have the main element in the private cloud, run by servers, and then the way they've approached this is they actually stream directly from the online material. So they don't have a proxy file, they actually stream directly from the online material, and their servers are basically transcoding the string format in real time through that process. And then what happens is when you stop at a frame, you then get the full resolution frame back again. We've got lots of questions, and we've certainly fired a lot of questions to Adobe about this at the moment, and we've had 0 responses. So we're really still waiting to see, how they truly are approaching it. But it's a very interesting solution. Whether they've got the whole production chain, etc., we're not sure at the moment. But clearly, they equally recognise that interactivity across the internet into private cloud is going to be an important element for our future of post-production. Cool. So we've sort of reached just introduction. Let's say we've got a tremendous amount to cover, so we're sort of skipping over the edges of some of these elements. As part of our process today, we obviously have our coffee break, and then we're going to have our lunch break. But what we're going to do some questions and answers right at the very end of the session. And then equally, we're here to do one-on-one. If you want a demo of something, or you've got a more intense question you want to go through, we're going to be available throughout the afternoon to have that conversation. So there will be a chance to ask questions. So we now, we've brought in our media, we've got it data wrangled, we're managing our media, we know all about our media now, and we've got remote locations logging and tracking and doing it. But let's just take a slight digression, because we really do need to think about our storage architecture. We really have to think about the cost elements and the performance elements of our storage. And this is where we really start introducing tiered storage into the system. So why do we need tiered storage? Well, one of the big issues we have at the moment is our online storage. What does it have to achieve? It tends to have to do with much higher bandwidth. We have to have multiple real-time streams of video. We've got a collaborative working environment. Those elements alone demand a very high-end storage solution, and that means expensive. Okay, it's unavoidable. We're not going to create all these environments reliably, with a bunch of SATA disks on a JBOD or a FireWire drive, on a network server from my laptop computer. We're talking more expensive storage. One of the big issues we have in this scenario is quite often our production will finish, and the person will say, "Okay, great, I'm finished here. We're going to go off for approval, saying we'll be back in a month. Can you keep my storage online, my media online?" And you really don't want to keep that media online in your expensive storage. So we now need to start thinking about promotion and demotion of our media according to the type of accessibility that we need. And this is where our tiered storage come in. And we need to talk about the tools of managing that promotion and demotion. So when our client comes and says, "Okay, I'll be back in 2 weeks, can keep my media online," we can then say, "Okay, great, we'll demote it to our nearline storage." And our nearline storage typically tends to be a disk-based storage. In this arena today, typically we've been using NAS-based technology. But actually what's getting much more interesting is object-based storage. And we're going to talk about object-based storage shortly. It gives us a lot of advantages and a level of API interfaces and development that can enable more usability and intuitive interfaces in the system. But we'll show that later on. So we're going to talk about promotion between online and nearline. And then obviously our final, non-real-time accessibility is our archive. And we'll talk about archive later on. But obviously what we want is, okay, this needs to sit on the shelf for 6 months, or this needs to be a long-term archive. I don't know when I'm going to bring it back. And we've got to think about what is our most cost-effective solution. And obviously cost represents time to access and performance of system. Okay, if we want all of those functions, then we pay more money as we increase those elements. So quite typically in the archive era, we really are talking about going back to tape, but to data tape that we can put on the shelf, and we'll talk about that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you back to Dave, and he's going to talk to you about promotion and demotion between the online and nearline storage. So here you go, Dave.
So here we have Object Matrix, which is our tier 2 storage. So far we've been doing everything on our Avid license, which is our tier 1. This is the admin interface for the Object Matrix. We can just see that everything's healthy, and you can see how many volts and our capacity. So within Object Matrix, they have a term which is a vault within the Object Matrix, within the storage. So a vault is like a folder. And then within this folder, within the vault, you can actually create specific rules and policies for that specific vault. So you could have multiple vaults within your facility for different roles. So I've got one here called Pinewood. At the top here, we can actually say, right, I only want it to be 4 or 5 terabytes, or you can say it's unlimited. So you can start to sort of carve up the your nearline storage specifically for jobs and workflows. Also within here. So one thing that's probably worth mentioning straight away, so it's clustered storage. So the benefits of clustered storage versus RAID are that you can have a greater sort of protection level. So you could go to N+3 or N+4, and then you can actually have more disk failures within your cluster, and then that allows you to actually sort of schedule your downtime to do your drive swaps. Whereas with RAID, typically, RAID 5, you have to do your drive swap as quick as you can because, your data could be at risk. The additional benefits of clustered storage is it's easier to expand as well. So as your archive or nearline grows, you can add nodes into your cluster and it all becomes one, clustered of storage. So within the Object Matrix, you can change the protection level. Typically, you'd have dual, so you'd be writing 2 files to different disks, different nodes within your cluster. And also it does compliance as well, so you can say anything that's written to this vault cannot be deleted for 2 years. All the vaults are encrypted as well. So another application, their sort of file system application, is their MXFS volume mounter. And from here, what you can do is you can import the vaults, which are encrypted, so you need the key, so no one can just sort of connect to the cluster and start, browsing the vaults. So once you've imported the vaults, you can see here, I could, on this machine, I could right-click and mount that, and what that would do is mount it as a drive letter on this instance, our Media Composer. So that enables you to have some very neat workflows for doing AMA and relinking back to your high-res, which is stored on your Tier 2 storage, which is cheaper. You could transcode to your ISIS, do your typical or traditional offline, and then relink back to your object matrix with your AMA workflow. So that's a very good application within their environment. Another tool that they have is DropSpot, which is their sort of their GUI, their front end. So as you notice on the right hand side here, we've got our vaults again. So I've imported that vault using the key. So we've got our Pinewood vault here, and there's a QuickTime on my desktop. And if I wanted to just add that to the object matrix, what we've got set up here is a metadata schema. So it's saying anything that's added to that vault, you need to populate it with this metadata. So this actual schema was from Strictly Come Dancing and the BBC, as you can probably see by some of the names. So I'm just going to add some very key metadata into here. So this is where sort of the objects start becoming to use. So with RAID storage, you store your media on the RAID storage, and then if you had metadata, it could be in an XML sitting next to it, or you could have a third-party application that holds the metadata. Whereas with object storage, what you're actually doing is you're adding the metadata with the object, with the actual file. So they're stored on the storage as a couple. So then you can start to search the storage using the objects and the metadata. So this is for card-based media, so it's asking me what my parent card's going to be. As you can see, that's doing the upload straight to our object matrix, and that's all searchable within here. So that sort of object matrix as a sort of a standalone application and workflow. What I'd like to show you is how it can be automated within Media Composer. So if you load up Media Composer again, and then what we've got here is our interconnect monitor. So this is sort of a service, our tool for monitoring what's going on between our interplay and our object matrix storage. So typically that will be on a server in the background, but for sort of demo purposes, I'll just show you here. So what I've set it to do is monitor a folder within our interplay named to be archived. So once I've done my my master sequence, or even if it's just some raw rushes or some media that I need to move off from my tier 1 to tier 2, I can simply drag a file into this folder, into the bin within Media Composer. And then if I just say check bin into interplay, we should see on the right hand side here that the interplay, once I select OK, the interplay will have that asset within that folder now, and the object matrix has seen that asset, and it's now pulling the media from our tier 1 storage and pushing it onto our object matrix tier 2. You can configure it so once it's done that, it'll delete the media from your tier 1, but typically you'd go back into Access as an administrator, confirm everyone's finished with it, it's on your tier 2 storage, and then you'd select delete. So hopefully you can see here how you can start to automate the whole workflow, as a in a back-end process, and your editor's still using a simple edit package that they know, and they don't have to start diving between different applications.
Cool. So we've just quickly done a demonstration of managing media between our tier 1 and our tier storage, our online and nearline. And the key, obviously, with the nearline is typically it's disk-based. We obviously talked about object storage there, but we need fast interaction. Although we don't want real-time interactions in the edit environment, we want to promote and demote very, very quickly. We need to bring that online. And quite often that material will sit there for a longer period. So the element of security and protection becomes very important in that element. So the idea is to actually move beyond RAID and go into that N+1 enterprise security, subject to the scale. And again, what we have to do, we have to analyze our risk and compare how much risk we want to do against our cost. So obviously less risk, more cost, more risk, lower cost. So we have to take allowances for those things. So we have to apply those elements. So one of the other interesting things, I keep mentioning the term cost, and and clearly these are big business decisions. We really need to budget this process. We obviously idolize that this is the ideal way of working, but we can't always afford it, and we need to think of how we manage this cost. And one of the interesting elements that's very much transformed for us as a reseller is that we really are becoming that bow tie communication. So not only are we taking responsible for that single phone number for that support and advising solutions and building workflows, we're also very much advising manufacturers about what the marketplace is doing, what the marketplaces need. Our manufacturers aren't as directly in contact with our communities as they used to be, because that's the nature of the business now. They tend to be working in much bigger volume, much lower cost items, which just do not allow for them to be in the daily contact they are. So the reseller role has become very strong there now. And this has been a great example for us with a company called Data Frameworks, IT-based company that does analysis of files within a centralized storage infrastructure. Very much from the IT world, we've been speaking to them about, well, how can we make you more media-centric? Because actually what you bring could become a very interesting business solution for a lot of our post-production production units. So they have a product called Clarity Now, and we're going to give you a demo of that, and we're actually still talking to them about them becoming more media aware. So at the moment, they really understand files and file structures. So the one element we have is clearly when we're dealing in Avid or asset management scenarios, typically the file name is the UID, the unique identification detail, which actually is associated with that database. So it doesn't relate to our project. We need to link that in with the metadata from the project that's going on. And there are ways we can do that. Certainly with Avid, we have the AAF element that goes with the file, which means we could extrapolate that. But here's a really good example of how we can actually make this work as our business. So I'm going to pass you back to David again, just to show you Clarity Now.
So this is our Clarity Now software. On the left-hand side here, we've got our volumes. So we've got our Interplay Archive, which is actually our object matrix vault, where we're moving all our media to. We've got Roadshow 01, which is our volume our workspace within ISIS. And then we've got our Venice volume here. And you can quickly see here on the right-hand side that we're using 1.71 terabytes, half a terabyte on our ISIS, and a couple of gig on our archive. And what this allows you to do is, as you can see from this pie chart here, very quickly you can have a look at a folder within our Venice internal storage, and we can see we've got 400 gigs from transcoding, we've got 145 in the green from Lotus on Track. And what this has done is it's looked at the directories and file names and started grouping stuff together. But you can actually configure it to use regular expressions. So if you are on a NAS or a SAN, and you have your production name or a job number, you can actually say, right, leave out the whole file name until you see the first underscore, use the job number, and then the last file name. And with that, you can actually start to, catalog and work out exactly what's on your storage and who owns it. One of the other features that you can do with it is you can go into a folder. So these are all sort of add-on scripts. There's a lot of functionality that can be driven from here. You can push stuff to archive. You can get job numbers from schedule systems as well. One of the ones that they use out in Hollywood quite a lot is a preview, and this is to find out if the content for their up-and-coming films is on the right tier of storage before the job comes in-house. And the booking staff actually use this to see if they've got enough media to take the job, and if all the media is in the right volumes and ready to go. So it's probably worth mentioning that Clarity Now actually is set up so it scans the volume, say at midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, and this is sort of a metadata extraction of what's going on, so you're not actually on the file system as such. So there's no risk of deleting or leaking feature films and things like that. And that's one of the reasons why they've got this watermark along the top as well. So you can add in the watermark from the user that logs in, so if they start doing screen grabs and things like that. And all the previews are created on the fly and then deleted when you close the window. Also here you've got the media info, so you can see when the file was created, what codec it is and things like that. But one of the key things it's very, very good at is creating reports for storage. So quickly here we can see that season 8 of 24 is taking up the most of that storage. So these are sort of a demo volume, these three at the bottom. But what we can do from here is we can actually generate a report. So if I want to say, right, I want to see what shows are on my storage, And quickly you can see here the winner is that's consuming the most space is 24, followed by loss down the bottom. So you can actually start to say to production that you're consuming X number of terabytes on the storage. But one better thing you can do with that is, say we go back to our Venice volume here and we have a look at all this Lotus on Track media. If I want to do a report on that volume here, I can say, right, they're using 1.17 terabytes, and I want to equate that into actual storage cost, pounds, or in here it's dollars. So I can turn around and say, right, that storage is actually costing me $194 per week. So you can factor in air conditioning, the cost of the storage, and then in colour, produce a bar graph and say, right, this production is costing me this amount of storage per week, and then you can actually start billing, the actual productions, whether that actually happened, but they're providing the tools, that can be done. So within the reports as well, you can actually say, right, these are the shows. I want to know what volumes they're on, so you can then group it by volumes. So you can start generating a lot of reports from all your different tiers of storage, add in all the costs for your different tiers, and then you can start moving, and actually seeing who's got your storage and how much it's costing. It's very interesting. We've done quite a few demos and installed it as evaluation. And as soon as you install it on someone's file system, there's always, 5-10 terabytes that's been there for 3 years and no one's known who it is. And until you see it there, you can actually go and say, right, whose is it? Can we delete it? Typically the answer is no, but at least you know who owns it.
Cool, thank you. So we are running up to our coffee break. We're on schedule because we started slightly late. So the great thing about data, I think that there was obviously a lot of lack of discipline because the perception of storage is that there's no cost to it. Again, we have that laptop community with their 3 terabyte, 300 pound FireWire drive and say, well, I'll just put it on my file drive. Why is that difficult? And we can very much talk about archive and backup, but if we can actually now start doing sanitized financial reports about the cost of keeping that media on our long-line storage or our nearline storage or even our archive storage, of which we can have different grades of cost in, then I think hopefully that will introduce disciplines and not allow people to keep media on infinity onto their main storage. So I think we've given you an awful lot of information to start with. Probably a great time for a cup of coffee to get you ready for the next section.